Agent Talia adjusted her molecular stabilizer, the faint hum against her wrist confirming that her human disguise remained intact. 6 months on this primitive planet had taught her to blend seamlessly into their society, her olive skin, dark eyes, and athletic build appearing completely unremarkable to the humans she passed on the bustling Seattle street. Rain pattered against her umbrella as she reviewed the information on her neural display, visible only to her eyes. Nathan Reed, 34, astronomer at the Pacific Northwest Observatory. Unmarried. No children. Few close connections. The perfect target, someone who would hardly be missed if the memory wipe went wrong and caused permanent cognitive damage. The mission parameters were simple: locate, confirm the breach, erase, and move on. Reed had captured something he shouldn't have, a glimpse of a cloaked Ardavi scout ship passing through the Sol system. Most humans would have dismissed it as an anomaly, but Reed had been doggedly analyzing the data for weeks, even reaching out to colleagues at SETI. He was getting dangerously close to proof. Talia's surveillance had been thorough. She'd observed him from afar, planted monitoring devices in his apartment and office, and even arranged a chance meeting at the university library to assess his character directly. Standard procedure for high-risk targets. What wasn't standard was how these encounters affected her. The first time they spoke, she'd been caught in a downpour without her umbrella. Reed had spotted her from the library steps and jogged over, offering to share his. The meteorologist said 20% chance of rain, he'd said with a self-deprecating smile. I've learned that in Seattle, that really means bring an umbrella and possibly an arc. His kindness was unnecessary. Her species could regulate body temperature and hardly notice discomfort from weather, but she'd accepted anyway, walking beside him to the bus stop while gathering intelligence on his work. His enthusiasm when speaking about the stars had seemed almost contagious. 3 more orchestrated meetings followed: a coffee shop near the observatory, a university lecture on exoplanets where she'd asked pointed questions, and finally, a debate about extraterrestrial life at a local science pub that had lasted until closing time. The mathematical probability of intelligent life existing elsewhere is virtually certain, he'd argued passionately, eyes bright with conviction. The real question is whether we'll recognize it when we see it. The irony hadn't been lost on her. Tonight would be their final encounter. Talia had gained access to the observatory where Reed worked the night shift alone. Her mind-wipe device, disguised as an ordinary smartphone, contained technology beyond human comprehension, capable of selectively erasing memories while leaving personality and general knowledge intact. He would forget everything about the anomaly he'd discovered and, unfortunately, about her as well. Talia entered the darkened building, bypassing the security system with a pulse from her device. Her footsteps echoed in the empty corridors as she made her way to the main observatory dome. Through the glass partition, she could see him hunched over a computer terminal, his profile illuminated by the screen's blue glow. For a moment, she hesitated. Reed had shown her kindness, intellect, warmth. None of these qualities were relevant to her mission, yet she found herself cataloging them anyway. "You're being irrational," she whispered to herself in her native tongue, a series of clicks and tones impossible for human vocal cords to produce. Sentiment was not part of her training. She pushed open the door. Reed turned, surprise quickly giving way to recognition, then pleasure. "Talia. What are you doing here so late?" His smile was genuine, trusting. She moved closer, device in hand. "I wanted to see what had you so excited about that deep field image you mentioned." The lie came easily to her lips. Perfect timing. "I was just about to run the enhancement algorithm again." He gestured for her to join him at the terminal. "There's something in these images I can't explain, but I think it might be artificial." "Show me," she said, positioning herself behind him, raising the device. One scan, one pulse, and Nathan Reed would return to his ordinary life, the dangerous knowledge extracted from his mind. The mission would be complete. She placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through the thin fabric of his shirt. "Nathan," she said softly, her finger hovering above the activation sequence. He turned, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time in her career as an operative, Talia felt something unfamiliar twist inside her chest, something dangerously close to doubt. Talia's finger trembled over the activation sequence. One touch and Nathan Reed would forget everything, the mysterious anomaly in his deep space images and every moment they had shared. The weight of her mission pressed against her chest, but something else competed with her sense of duty. "Before I show you my findings," Nathan said, oblivious to the danger hovering behind him, "I wanted to thank you." Her hand froze. "Thank me? For what?" "For taking me seriously." He swiveled in his chair to face her, nearly brushing against the device. "Everyone else thinks I'm chasing ghosts, but you actually listen." Talia's training demanded she complete her objective without hesitation, but the earnestness in his eyes made her pause. She needed to scan his mind first anyway, standard protocol to ensure all compromised memories would be tagged for deletion. "May I?" she asked, raising the device as if to take a photo. "The lighting is perfect with the stars through the dome." Nathan nodded, smiling easily. "Sure, though I'm hardly photogenic after 18 hours of staring at data." She activated the preliminary scan, her pupil implants translating the neural patterns displayed on her device. The process was invisible to him. To Nathan, she was simply checking her phone after taking his picture. What she saw in his memories staggered her. There she was, through his eyes, not as the calculated operative she knew herself to be, but as something entirely different. She saw herself laughing at the coffee shop, her head tilted back in a moment of unguarded joy that she didn't even remember experiencing. She watched herself gesturing passionately during their debate, her eyes bright with intelligence that he clearly admired. But most disturbing were the moments she hadn't registered as significant, the way he noticed her adjusting her molecular stabilizer, misinterpreting it as a nervous habit he found endearing, how he deliberately arrived early at the lecture hall to save her a seat, the lingering touch of hands when he'd passed her a cup of tea. In his mind, she was fascinating. Important. Beautiful. Talia had been trained to recognize the biochemical signatures of human attraction, but experiencing it directed at her with such intensity was overwhelming. Nathan didn't see an alien threat, he saw a woman who challenged and excited him. "Is something wrong?" Nathan asked, noticing her prolonged silence. She lowered the device, struggling to maintain composure. "No. Just checking something." The scan had revealed more than just compromised information. If she proceeded with the memory wipe, she would be erasing a version of herself that existed nowhere else in the universe, a Talia who smiled genuinely, who debated passionately, who connected with another being without calculation or deceit. Nathan turned back to his computer. "Look at this," he said, pulling up the enhanced image that had caught his attention. "This object changes trajectory in a way that defies explanation. It's not affected by gravitational forces like it should be." The screen showed a faint outline of what she instantly recognized as an Ardavi vessel, exactly what her superiors feared he'd discovered. This was the evidence that mandated his memory be purged. "Remarkable," she managed to say. "I think." He hesitated, lowering his voice though they were alone. "I think we're looking at proof of intelligent life." The irony of his statement hit her again, but this time with a sharp pang of something like regret. He continued, excitement making his words tumble faster. "If I'm right, this changes everything. Our understanding of our place in the universe, our future as a species, everything." Talia's communicator vibrated against her skin, the subdermal implant sending a clear message, "Status report overdue. Complete mission immediately." She placed her hand on Nathan's shoulder, feeling his warmth through the fabric of his shirt. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through her normally regulated body temperature. "Nathan," she said softly. He turned, their faces suddenly close in the dim light of the observatory. His eyes dropped briefly to her lips before meeting her gaze. The neural scan had revealed his desire for this moment, a kiss he'd imagined more than once. Before she could rationalize her actions, Talia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The sensation was electric, unfamiliar, thrilling in ways her extensive training hadn't prepared her for. Nathan responded immediately, his hand coming up to cup her face with tender reverence. When they broke apart, his eyes were wide with wonder. "I've been wanting to do that since you argued with me about the Drake equation," he whispered. Talia's mind raced. This connection complicated everything. The memory wipe technology was sophisticated, but imperfect. Strong emotional attachments created neural pathways that sometimes resisted erasure, leaving fragments behind that could eventually reconstruct themselves. If his feelings for her were as strong as the scan suggested, a standard wipe might fail. More importantly, she wasn't sure she wanted to erase these memories. In his mind, she was someone worth remembering. Her communicator vibrated again, more urgently. "Alert, anomalous readings detected. Agent possible compromise. Reinforcement dispatched." Time was running out. Her superiors were growing suspicious of her delay. "Nathan," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "What if what you discovered wasn't meant to be found? What if knowing puts you in danger?" His expression grew serious. "Truth is always worth the risk. If we're not alone in the universe, people deserve to know, whatever the consequences." In that moment, looking into his determined eyes, Talia made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She wouldn't, erase what they'd shared. But she also couldn't let him expose her people, not yet. Talia raised the device again, fingers dancing across its surface as she reconfigured its parameters. Instead of erasing his memories, she would modify them slightly, and embed a message deep within his mind, one that would find its way to his consciousness when the time was right. "I need to show you something," she said, her heart racing with the enormity of her betrayal to her mission. "But first, close your eyes." The soft hum of the modified device pulsed against Talia's palm as she pressed it to Nathan's temple. His eyes remained closed, trust evident in his relaxed expression, a trust she was simultaneously honoring and betraying. Instead of wiping his memories clean, she was carefully rewriting them, weaving a complex tapestry of half-truths. "Keep your eyes closed," she whispered, her voice steadier than her resolve. The device interfaced directly with his neural pathways, allowing her to see exactly what she was modifying. She adjusted his memory of discovering the Ardavi vessel, replacing it with a more ambiguous astronomical anomaly, interesting enough to explain his excitement, but not conclusive enough to warrant further investigation. More painfully, she altered his memories of their encounters, dulling their significance just enough to keep her superiors from detecting her deception. But deep beneath these surface changes, in the limbic regions where emotional memories formed the strongest bonds, she implanted something else, a dormant sequence of thoughts and images. A message in a bottle, cast into the ocean of his subconscious. "When you dream of stars falling upward, remember me. Find me at the place where water meets the sky. I'll be waiting." The coordinates were encoded in a memory of a sunset they'd never shared, on a beach he'd never visited with her. It would surface eventually, triggered by specific astronomical events she'd calculated would occur in 56 days. Nathan's eyelids fluttered as the device completed its work. The process wasn't painful, but it left subjects disoriented. He would be confused for several minutes, long enough for her to escape. "Talia," he murmured, his consciousness returning. "What happened?" She stepped back, schooling her features into casual concern. "You seemed to zone out for a minute there. Too many hours staring at star charts, perhaps?" He blinked several times, the new memories settling into place. "Maybe you're right. I feel strange." The modified scan had worked. His eyes no longer held that spark of recognition, that warmth that had made her question everything. Now he looked at her as he might a casual acquaintance, friendly, but without the depth of connection she'd glimpsed in his unaltered memories. Her communicator vibrated again, an urgent pulse pattern against her skin. Reinforcement ETA 17 minutes. Maintain position. They were coming to check on her, or more likely, to eliminate her if they suspected her loyalty had wavered. She needed to act quickly. "I should let you get back to work," she said, moving toward the door. "It's getting late." Nathan nodded, distracted, already turning back to his computer where the altered images no longer showed anything remarkable. "Thanks for stopping by. It was nice seeing you again, ah." He hesitated, her name suddenly less prominent in his memory. "Talia," she supplied, her chest tightening at this small erasure of herself. "Right, Talia." He smiled politely. "Have a good night." She walked calmly from the observatory, maintaining her composure until she was certain she was alone in the corridor. Then she ran, her footsteps echoing in the empty building. She had less than 15 minutes to complete her deception before her fellow operatives arrived. Outside in the cool night air, Talia activated her direct communication link to mission control. The quantum encrypted channel opened immediately. "Agent Talia reporting. Memory adjustment complete. Target Nathan Reed has been neutralized as a security threat. Transmit scan confirmation," came the immediate response, the clicks and tones of her native language sounding harsh after weeks of speaking English. She sent the altered data from her device, a carefully constructed false report showing a complete memory wipe of all Ardavi-related information. The falsification would hold up to standard scrutiny, but not to a deep probe. She was counting on the routine nature of the mission to prevent such thorough examination. Data received. Status of target? Return to normal activities. Memories of anomalous observations replaced with inconclusive data. Subject believes his theories were flawed. A pause. Your biosignatures show irregularities, Agent Talia. Explain. Her pulse had indeed increased, a physiological response to her rebellion that she couldn't entirely control. She had anticipated this question. Mild quantum interference from Earth's primitive communication networks affected the stabilizer. Compensating now. Another pause, longer this time. She stood perfectly still beside her vehicle, knowing that the next words would determine whether she had successfully deceived them. Reinforcement team will verify your report and collect you for immediate extraction. Remain at your position. Extraction. The word sent ice through her veins. Once back among her people, a standard post-mission neural scan would reveal everything, her hesitation, her connection with Nathan, her betrayal. Acknowledged, she responded, already moving toward her car. Will await extraction. The moment the communication ended, Talia activated her vehicle's ignition sequence. She had perhaps 12 minutes before the reinforcement team realized she had fled. 12 minutes to disappear. As she drove away from the observatory, she executed the most difficult part of her plan. Removing her subdermal communicator required precision. The device was integrated with her nervous system to ensure agents couldn't go offline without authorization. Using a specialized tool from her field kit, she extracted the communicator with a sharp gasp of pain, then crushed it beneath her heel. Blood trickled down her arm as she programmed a new destination into her vehicle's navigation system. She would need to abandon it soon, it could be tracked, but first, she needed supplies from her safe house. Talia's mind raced with calculations and contingencies. Her people rarely visited Earth directly, preferring to monitor from a distance, but they had resources beyond human comprehension. They would hunt her relentlessly once they discovered her betrayal. And there was no going back. In choosing to protect Nathan, in choosing to preserve herself in his memory rather than erase the evidence of her existence, she had become a traitor. The penalty was severe, complete neural erasure, the destruction of everything that made her who she was. As she drove through the night, one thought sustained her. In 56 days, if her plan worked, if she survived that long, Nathan would begin to dream of her. He would feel the pull of memories buried beneath the surface, calling him toward a truth he couldn't possibly understand yet. And perhaps, just perhaps, when he found her, they could face whatever came next together. 53 days of hiding had changed Talia in ways she hadn't anticipated. She stood at the edge of the Pacific, the small coastal town of Nehalem behind her, watching waves crash against the shore as dusk settled over the horizon. Her dark hair, now cut short and dyed a coppery red, whipped around her face in the wind. The molecular stabilizer at her wrist required daily calibration now that she was cut off from Ardavi resources, and maintaining her human form consumed more energy than before. 3 more days until Nathan's implanted memories would begin to surface. If he followed them, if the neural pathway she'd constructed held firm against her people's interference, he would find his way here, to this remote stretch of Oregon coastline. If he remembered at all. Her secure perimeter alert chimed softly, vibrating against her skin. Someone had crossed the boundary she'd established half a mile back, not close enough to be dangerous yet, but concerning nonetheless. The Ardavi rarely gave up on a hunt, especially for a rogue operative with knowledge of their surveillance network. Talia retreated from the beach toward the small cabin she'd rented using falsified credentials. Inside, tactical screens displayed her security grid, showing a single figure moving methodically through the woods. Human, not Ardavi, their heat signatures were distinctive, but that didn't mean they weren't working for her former employers. Human collaborators were rare but not unheard of. She activated her defense protocols, gathering only essential equipment. This location was compromised, she would need to relocate again, establishing another safe point where Nathan might find her when the time came. The constant movement was exhausting, but necessary. As she prepared to flee, a notification flashed across her neural display, a match to the facial recognition parameters she'd been running for weeks. The observatory's external cameras had captured Nathan Reed leaving the building 20 minutes ago, his expression troubled, distracted. 3 days early. The memories were surfacing ahead of schedule. Talia's pulse quickened. Either her calculations had been off, or something had triggered the emergence prematurely. Either way, she needed to know what he remembered, what he might do next. Taking a calculated risk, she activated a remote viewing protocol, accessing the microphone on Nathan's personal device, a surveillance technique she'd implemented before her defection but had refrained from using until now. His voice came through, strained and confused, talking to himself as he drove home. Same dream again. Stars falling upward, her face just out of reach. It doesn't make sense. He remembered. Not everything, not yet, but enough to start the process. The neural pathway was intact. A crash from outside interrupted her surveillance. The intruder had breached her outer defenses faster than anticipated. Talia grabbed her emergency pack and slipped out the back door just as the cabin's front windows shattered. She moved silently through the darkness, her enhanced vision allowing her to navigate the dense forest without difficulty. Behind her, she heard voices, 2 of them now, coordinating their search patterns. Not Ardavi themselves, but definitely their agents, using tracking technology beyond Earth's current capabilities. Talia reached her concealed vehicle and activated its stealth mode before accelerating away from the cabin. She needed to disappear again, to stay alive long enough for Nathan to find her. But first, she needed to leave him another breadcrumb, something to guide him when the fragmented memories weren't enough. Nathan Reed stared at his bedroom ceiling, sleep eluding him for the 3rd consecutive night. The dreams had started a week ago, vivid, disorienting visions of a woman whose name danced just beyond his recollection. Talia. When he woke, the name was clear, but her significance remained frustratingly obscure. He remembered meeting her, of course. A fellow astronomy enthusiast he'd encountered several times over the past months. Pleasant conversations, nothing more. Yet in his dreams, they shared moments of startling intimacy, a passionate kiss in the observatory, conversations that seemed to carry hidden meanings, her hands on his face as she whispered something urgent, something vital. "You're losing it, Reed," he muttered, throwing off the covers and padding to the kitchen for water. His reflection in the dark window looked haggard, shadows beneath his eyes testifying to his disturbed sleep. Something wasn't right. Since those strange dreams began, he'd started noticing inconsistencies in his work as well. Data sets that didn't match his notes. Research paths abandoned without explanation. An entire project on deep space anomalies apparently shelved weeks ago, though he had only the vaguest recollection of deciding to do so. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor as a memory surfaced with sudden clarity, Talia's hand on his shoulder, her device against his temple, her voice saying, "This won't hurt, but it will change everything." Nathan gasped, bracing himself against the counter as more fragments emerged, her explaining she wasn't human, the evidence he'd found of her ship, the kiss that defied all logic yet felt more real than anything in his recent memory. The doorbell rang, jolting him from the flood of returning memories. At 3 a.m, no visitor could be welcome news. Carefully avoiding the broken glass, Nathan approached the door warily. Through the peephole, he saw only an empty porch, but when he cracked the door open, he found a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a compass, antique in appearance but with oddly modern components visible beneath its glass face. No note accompanied it, but as Nathan held it in his palm, the needle spun wildly before settling with unwavering certainty toward the west. Another memory surfaced, Talia's voice, a whisper against his consciousness, "Find me at the place where water meets the sky. I'll be waiting." The compass warmed in his hand, responding to some technology he couldn't begin to understand. Somehow, he knew it would lead him to her, if he had the courage to follow. 200 miles away, Talia disabled the remote delivery drone and erased all evidence of its journey. The compass would guide him more precisely than the implanted memories alone, assuming he chose to follow it. Assuming he wanted to find her once he remembered what she truly was. Her neural display flashed another warning. Ardavi ships had entered Earth's atmosphere, 3 of them, their trajectories converging on the western seaboard. They were escalating the hunt, bringing resources normally reserved for much greater threats. She had underestimated her value to them, or perhaps, more accurately, the danger they perceived in her defection. A rogue operative with knowledge of their operations, with emotional ties to a human she'd been ordered to neutralize, she represented everything the Ardavi feared about prolonged contact with Earth. Talia sent a burst transmission to her remaining safeguards around Nathan's home and workplace. If her former colleagues came for him before he reached her, the systems would alert her, giving her one last chance to intervene. She drove through the night toward her final destination, a secluded cove 70 miles north of her compromised cabin. Whether Nathan found her or not, her pursuers were closing in. She had perhaps 2 days before confrontation became inevitable. As dawn broke over the mountains to the east, Talia allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had spent her entire existence in service to the Ardavi collective, believing in their mission to observe and occasionally guide less advanced civilizations. Never before had she questioned their methods or their wisdom. Until Nathan had looked at her, truly looked at her, and seen someone worthy of remembering. Now, racing against time and her own people, Talia found herself hoping for something she'd never considered possible, a future determined by her own choices, perhaps even shared with someone who could see beyond what she was to who she might become. If only he remembered. If only he followed. If only they both survived what was coming. The coastal fog embraced the jagged rocks like ghostly fingers as Nathan Reed pulled his car to a stop at the end of the unmarked dirt road. According to his maps, this remote stretch of Oregon coastline had no name, just a series of coordinates that meant nothing to the average person. But to Nathan, they had become everything. For 7 days, he had followed the compass's unwavering direction, driving west and then north, sleeping in his car when exhaustion overwhelmed him. With each passing mile, more memories had surfaced, impossible, fantastical memories that should have frightened him but instead filled him with growing certainty. Talia wasn't human. The realization should have been earth-shattering, but instead, it felt like remembering an obvious truth he'd somehow forgotten. She was something else, something extraordinary, and she had spared him when she was meant to erase him. The compass in his hand pulsed with soft blue light as he stepped from the car, urging him toward a narrow path that wound down the cliffside to a secluded cove below. The morning air tasted of salt and possibility as he began his descent. When he reached the bottom, he saw her. Talia stood at the water's edge, her back to him, copper-red hair dancing in the wind, different from how he remembered, but he knew her instantly. Something in the way she held herself, perfectly still yet somehow alert to everything around her, confirmed what his restored memories had revealed. She was beautifully, wonderfully alien. "You remembered," she said without turning, her voice carrying to him over the crash of waves. Nathan took a step forward, then another. Not at first. It came back in pieces, dreams, flashes, contradictions in what I thought I knew. She turned then, and he faltered. Her eyes held both hope and resignation, the look of someone who had gambled everything and was prepared to lose. "You took something from me," he said, closing the distance between them until only a few feet remained. "My memories of you, of what I discovered." Talia nodded, no trace of deception in her expression. "I was ordered to take everything, to make you forget entirely. Instead, I hid the truth where they couldn't easily find it." "Why?" "Because you remembered me in ways no one ever has." Her voice softened. "In your mind, I was more than a mission. I was real." The last of Nathan's fragmented memories clicked into place, the kiss in the observatory, the truth of what he discovered, the choice she had made that night. "They're hunting you now, aren't they? Your people." "Yes." She glanced toward the horizon. "They've been closing in for days. I wasn't sure you would find me before they did." "Why risk it? Why not just complete your mission and return to your people?" Talia closed the remaining distance between them, reaching up to touch his face with fingers that trembled slightly. "Because there was something I needed to know." "What?" "If what I saw in your memories was real. If you could remember me, the real me, and still look at me the way you did that night." Nathan covered her hand with his own, holding it against his cheek. The compass between them pulsed once more before going dark, its purpose fulfilled. "Show me," he whispered. "Show me who you really are." Talia hesitated, then reached for the device at her wrist. The molecular stabilizer that maintained her human appearance had been calibrated and recalibrated for weeks. Disabling it now would reveal her true form for the first time since she'd arrived on Earth. "Are you certain?" she asked. Instead of answering, Nathan leaned forward and kissed her, a declaration of certainty more profound than words could convey. Her lips were warm against his, familiar despite everything that separated their worlds. When they broke apart, Talia's eyes shimmered with an iridescence that wasn't quite human. She stepped back and deactivated the stabilizer. The transformation was subtle yet profound, her skin taking on a faint luminescence, patterns of light shifting beneath its surface like stars moving through distant nebulae. Her eyes, now clearly alien with vertical pupils that expanded in the dim morning light, watched him anxiously. "You're beautiful," Nathan breathed, reaching for her hand, 5 fingers like his own, but with joints that moved with impossible grace. Relief flooded her expression. "I've never revealed myself to anyone before." "Not by choice." A sharp sound cut through the air, a high-pitched whine beyond normal human hearing, but Nathan felt it in his teeth, in his bones. Talia's expression hardened as she looked skyward. "They found us," she said, her voice tight. "Sooner than I expected." "What happens now?" "They'll take me back," erase what I've become. Her eyes met his, fierce and determined. And they'll erase you completely this time. No hidden memories, no second chances. Nathan followed her gaze upward, where the clouds seemed to distort in unnatural patterns. Then we run. There's nowhere on this planet they can't find us eventually. Then we fight. He gripped her shoulders. You said I discovered something I wasn't supposed to see. What if we exposed it? What if we told everyone? A slow smile spread across Talia's face, the same smile he'd first been drawn to, alien features notwithstanding. That would violate every protocol my people have established. It would force them to either retreat or acknowledge their presence officially. Would it keep us alive? It might. She pulled a device from her pocket, similar to the one she'd used on him in the observatory, but modified with components he didn't recognize. I've been gathering evidence, preparing for this possibility. But once we begin, there's no going back. For either of us. The whining sound intensified. Through breaks in the clouds, Nathan could now see shapes that defied conventional aircraft design, moving with impossible speed and precision. I chose you once, he said, taking her free hand in his. I'm choosing you again. Talia's alien eyes glistened with what might have been tears. They told us humans were primitive, predictable. That your emotions made you weak. She squeezed his hand. They were wrong. She activated the device, and a pulse of energy expanded outward in concentric rings. Somewhere above them, the alien craft faltered momentarily. What was that? A signal. I just transmitted everything I know about the Ardavi presence on Earth to every major observatory, research institution, and news outlet on the planet. Her smile was both triumphant and terrified. Along with undeniable proof. Nathan looked up as the clouds parted fully, revealing 3 sleek vessels hovering above the cove, their surfaces rippling with technology beyond human understanding. In minutes, perhaps seconds, they would descend. What happens now? He asked again. Talia pulled him close, her alien warmth against him both strange and comforting. Now we negotiate. They can't silence everyone who receives that data. The secret is out. As the ships descended, casting otherworldly light across the beach, Nathan held the woman from another world who had risked everything for him, for them. Whatever came next, whether diplomacy or danger, they would face it together. I remembered you, he whispered against her luminescent skin. I'll always remember you. Talia's fingers intertwined with his as they stood their ground, 2 beings from different worlds united against the coming storm. In her eyes, Nathan saw not fear but possibility, the same wonder he'd felt when gazing at the stars, now reflected back at him from someone who had traveled among them. The ships landed, and a new chapter began.